in our elder track program. So that means he goes through I believe it's a full 2-year process, 6-month exploratory phase, and then 18 months of training to be an elder. He also helps run our Covenant House program. He's the boots on the ground, manages all the houses, all the guys. He kind of runs the show. So that's where he's at now. But as a lot of you know already, he's got quite an interesting story that I think is going to be very fascinating and empowering for us to listen to. So Matt came from 17 years of addiction, and now, as I've already said, leads our addiction program called Covenant House. So let's get into it. Matt, tell us let's start at the beginning. How'd you grow up and whatnot?
Well, so when I was 5, it was actually my 5th birthday. I was taken away from my biological parents. Father went to prison. Biological mother actually ended up in a mental institution, short term. You know? So I always joke about it, tell people I come from excellent gene pool, right? So, but I was fortunate in that my uncle on my mom's side took me in.
Okay.
They lived about a mile away from my grandparents, which you hear a lot about.
And this is in Davenport?
No, this is in a small town in Kansas.
Okay, small town Kansas boy.
Yeah, I was born in Wichita, Kansas. Fortunately, I didn't have to grow up there. It's pretty rough. It's bigger than Davenport.
Yeah.
It's a lot goes on there.
So your uncle raised you.
Yep.
And what'd you say happened to your biological mom?
Well, she's dead now.
Yes. I know we'll get to that, but
okay. But she went when my dad went to prison. She went to a mental institution. It was very short term though.
Okay.
They didn't keep her.
But at 5 years old, your mom kind of left the scene in the sense of raising you.
Oh yeah, both parents gone. Yeah.
So what happened to your dad?
Last time I talked to him was, I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, I really
so
don't know.
you as a child, or have you talked to him as an adult, or is he still alive?
Rumor has it, and this is how much I
Wow,
actually
so you're
know.
that removed, okay.
Yeah, rumor has it that he died back when I was 30 or something.
Wow.
Yeah, so
no relationship?
None at all.
Okay, so you grew up fatherless?
You could say that.
I mean, biologically fatherless.
Yeah.
So raised by your grandparents?
For the most part, yes.
Go ahead.
The memorable part to my childhood was with my grandparents. My uncle, bless his heart, he took me in.
Yeah.
But he was rough around the edges, construction worker, had a temper, so that went down its own avenue. I was actually taken from him in the 4th grade for child abuse.
Right.
And then they end up putting me back into that home. Back there, here it's DHS, back there it's SRS.
Okay.
But they were involved pretty heavily. And then when the woman I call mom today got a divorce from my uncle, right? So that's how she even became my mom, was they were married when he adopted me.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So that's the lady you always talk about as mom.
Yes.
Is your uncle's ex-wife?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so when they got a divorce when I was 12, she moved back here to Iowa. And in my mind, she had no reason to care what happened to me. I was his problem.
Right.
And then as an adult, I was in my 20s and started, everything kind of peaked back home. And
yeah. What do you mean by peaked?
Well, I just got out of jail.
Hold on. Don't get there yet. Don't get there. So what was your childhood like? Was it rough? Do you think you were raised well? Were you in poverty? How would you describe it?
So, I would say during the younger years when I lived with my uncle, it was rough. Mm-hmm. It was rough. There was some physical abuse, for sure.
Okay. Like you were physically abused?
Me, my older brother, mom.
Do you mind giving a memory of that? Like what that actually looked like in detail?
Well, And this was actually after I was placed back in the home from being taken out for child abuse, because he left bruises.
Wow.
And some people argue I deserve this. It's like,
You're one of those kids, a rowdy kid?
I was really bad. I was. But I was supposed to go out and mow the yard. And I learned that if the mower didn't run, I didn't have to mow the yard. So I dumped water in the oil and everything. And they figured it out.
Sneaky.
Right? Yeah, they figured it out. And anything that cost him money. That was what would get him riled up.
Yeah.
So replacing a mower, and I remember he picked me up by the throat, like, I don't have to leave marks, kind of thing. And that was one of those shaky moments, like real, like, where I drew back, like, man, this is pretty.
So you remember being held up and choked?
Yeah.
Basically, okay.
Yeah.
And you would have been how old at that point?
At that point, I would have been maybe 10.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Bro, there's no 10-year-old that deserves to be held up and choked.
It was a joke.
No. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we get that clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so you grew up in some abuse, which obviously we know can be pretty traumatic for a child. So that's what you remember from your younger years. And then now get into, like, what did it look like getting into the whole drugs? Why do you think you got into drugs? How did that start?
So an interesting part, and I talked to my grandma not that long ago, and we were kind of rehashing some of this, and it's kind of interesting to see where I'm at now and kind of where things started. But when I was 13, I went to Silver State Baptist Youth Camp over the summer. It was kind of my grandpa's way to get rid of me for a little bit.
This was 13, you said?
Yeah, when I was 13.
Yep.
And up there, I moved in with my grandparents when I was 12. When the divorce happened, I got to choose. And so I went to Silver State Baptist Youth Camp in Colorado, and the last day there, they had all of these older, like, missionaries and preachers and stuff come and preach, and they played this song, like, "Who's Gonna Take Our Place," kind of thing. And they had an altar call at the end, like to make professions of faith and stuff, right?
Wow.
And me and my best friend in church, we traveled 17 miles to church each week.
Wow.
So my best friend in church wasn't my best friend at home. We'll just clear that up before I get into other stories.
Yeah.
But me and him both went forward. I went forward and said, "Hey, I'm going to grow up and be a preacher," right?
Did you really?
Yes.
You said that at 13 years old?
At 13. And my friend said he was going to be a missionary. The interesting factor about that is David went into the military and actually did do some missionary work through all of that, which is actually very interesting.
Wow.
I just found that out too.
Wow.
But when we come down off that mountain, of course our parents are ecstatic. My grandpa's super happy. That's and so Brother Joe, which was our pastor there, he did this thing called popcorn preaching.
Yeah.
For all the youth that had made professions of faith that.
Wow.
And so I still remember what it was on, and it's kind of funny because Grandma and I were kind of joking about it. But we had like 5-10 minutes, in the service, and it's funny because it kind of shows, like, it was a legalistic message, but it's the way I was taught, right?
Yeah.
It was on us being the temple of God. And I remember my example was like, you wouldn't go over here on the wall and draw pictures or write your name on it, so why do you do that to yourself? And that kind of...
Wow.
That was my...
So you preached a message when you were 13 years old. Yep. And this was prior to addiction?
Barely. The second I come off that mountain... So it's interesting because my biological mother came for a visit shortly after that.
Yeah.
And we smoked pot together for that birthday.
Right.
All those things. And so that kind of...
Did she introduce you to drugs?
No.
So how did you get introduced to it?
So my best friend, like I said, not the one from church.
Yep.
But the one that I spent most of my time with, his parents actually they made meth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they made it. And so it was nothing to go in their room and steal some, right?
Right. And you would have been how old?
13.
At 13 years old.
At 13.
You were stealing meth.
Yep, and then we'd stay up all night and play GoldenEye 007 on Nintendo 64. That's what we did with our.
And they had no idea?
I think they knew, but I mean, what do you do with your son who's stealing your drugs? Right?
Gosh.
Like,
what about? I mean, and clearly your grandparents didn't know this, or
it took them a while to figure it out, and I remember. And it's crazy because I remember when it actually came to the surface, and Grandpa tells me, "Don't go to school today. You've got a doctor's appointment." And like big red flags go off. I'm like, "Wait a minute, surprise doctor appointment? This has got to be a drug test."
right?
And so I'm not gonna say how, just in case any of my Covenant house guys are watching.
Yeah.
But I passed it, and my sister. My sister and I kind of got into this battle, and I won't go too much into that, but I did drugs with her too.
Right.
And so she told my grandpa, she says, "I have no clue how he passed that."
Right. So I've just got to, I mean, psychologically, right? Because obviously you know how I was raised.
Right.
I mean, in a preacher's home, with biological parents in a very healthy family, like I can't fathom being like, oh, I'm about to go try meth.
Right.
You see what I mean? It seems so like otherworldly to even think about. I would have been so terrified, known how dangerous it was.
Yeah.
Do you think that some of that is a disconnect? Like, was there a disconnect because did you almost feel like an orphan? Because you lacked that biological love from a mom and dad?
So the main time that surfaced, and like I would stay the night at other, some of my friends' houses and stuff. Mm-hmm. And when it sunk in really hard was when I would hear someone's mom say, "Man, you look like your dad," or "That face is just like your dad." That's when it would hit. Like, man, I don't even know.
Right.
But
I know that's when it surfaced. But do you think that it was traumatic and you just didn't even know what? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm sure it was like. There was the initial shock of it that I think we just kind of learned to suppress, right?
Yeah.
And then, I will say that I was always drawn to the drug scene.
Really?
Yeah, I was always drawn to it. And part of that subconsciously, I really think now looking back at it was like, because like, my biological father was never in the picture, but my mother would reach out to me, "Hey, I'm going to come see you." And she wouldn't show up. Yeah. And, there was all those, multiple times. And there became this thought in my mind, like, man, what is so amazing about drugs that she chooses them over me? Gosh. So it's got to be amazing, right? This is all in my mind. And I'm just like, what is it about them?
Right.
And so there was that gravitational pull in that direction.
Did it almost make you feel connected to your mom in a weird way?
When we did it together, yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually our only bonding moments.
Man.
Was drug use together, which.
Yeah. So walk me through the next years then. So 13, you start using meth, and then so what did the next decade look like?
So a lot of sneaking around. Of course, my grades plummet.
Do you end up graduating high school?
Yes, and there's a whole story behind that too. So things really just run their course in my addiction and my outbursts. That as I was getting older in my teen years, I started to get some resentments, and none were against my grandparents. Like they were the two people that I just, I adore to this day. But like there was an anger. There just was. And it manifests itself in outlashing, fights in school, fights outside of school. Yeah, just all kinds.
So you were an aggressive, violent.
Oh yeah.
Were you really? That is so fascinating knowing you now.
I know.
That can possibly be true.
I know. I know.
Because everyone that knows you now is like gentle Matt, like,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And it was one of those things that I actually wrestled with for some time, because I would go through phases where like I would be a gentle person because I knew that was right, and I knew that's the way, that's kind of how I was raised by my grandparents.
Right.
But then I would feel walked on, pushed around and stuff, and I would flip that switch back, right? And it came to a place where I eventually asked the Lord to take that from me.
Right.
Because I don't want to be that way. Right.
So at these age, I mean, are you using drugs all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it made it possible, partly because of, I won't say his name, my best friend's family, and then my family, my older sister married into a family that it was rampant. You could go to about any of the married in families' houses and get it at any time.
Right.
And so it was like it was too easy to access.
Yeah. When did you realize, I'm addicted?
Oh man, the worst part about that is that wasn't until way later in life.
Really?
Yeah, I went through. I probably was 22 by time, and I actually my grandpa and my grandmother sat me down and they're like, Matt, we really want you to consider going to rehab.
And that was at 22.
That was at 22.
And you didn't get sober till age-wise?
Oh, like when did I actually sober up and stay?
Yeah.
33.
That was at 22 that they. Wow.
Yeah, that was my first rehab. And Grandpa took me clear across the state of Kansas in hopes that I would grasp it and keep it,
Yeah.
But I just built the same life there.
Really? So you went across the state.
Yep.
And just started the whole same thing.
Yep. I actually did like 6 to 7 months of inpatient rehab, got a job, got my own little mobile home, didn't buy it but was renting it. Where I messed up is I got out of rehab, was in that mobile home drinking by myself, talking to some girl on the phone from back home, and decided, you know what, I'll just move you up here with me. And so we did all that, and
just snowballed into the same stuff.
Yep, exactly.
So obviously when you're not in this world, you hear stories of like crazy stuff that happens in the drug world.
Yeah.
Do you mind painting a picture at all about like what that was like? I mean, any stories that come to your mind?
Man, so many. Well, I mean, obviously without going into too much detail, obviously like sex and drugs come hand in hand.
Really?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that made it harder to get out of. When I came to a place where I was wanting sobriety, like I knew the drugs were destroying me, like honestly, I mean, this is so horrible, but there was no sweeter gesture as a drug addict than I'll share my drugs with you, right? And so that entire aspect of...
Wow, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, that the entire aspect of just pursuing a relationship is tainted and changed, and it's not the same anymore because that's what it was. And so breaking away from that and just deciding, okay, you know what, I'm better off not than that,
Yeah.
And so, of course, a lot of immorality, multiple, here and there kind of situations. There was a point when I was moving around from place to place, and I remember one place that I stayed, and it was winter, it was cold, and they had a kerosene, like one of those torpedoes, in the house, heating it, This is probably the most extreme living situation I was ever in. And they had a cooler, you know, that you just, like, beer cooler pretty much, right? And right outside the back door, and that's what we were going to the bathroom in, right? Close the cooler, and it kept it.
So this is like a drug house that you'd hear about,
Yeah, that was probably the most.
And
extreme.
how many people were living there?
At that point, there were 5. And I mean, you can just imagine the condition of this place. You know, it was just a wreck.
When you're in that, do you like wake up and look around and like, are you disgusted with yourself?
Oh, of course.
Right. So there's like a self-shame too. There's like
oh yeah.
I've always wondered that, you know, like when these people, are they just so drugged out the whole time they're not thinking about that, or do they know that this is gross?
I knew.
You knew?
I knew. There were some people, you know, and this sounds kind of bad to say, but because of drugs, I associated with people that I never would have associated with outside of that. I put myself in situations and predicaments that I never would have went into if it had not been for the drugs. Like, they just pull you into this darkness, you know, because you'll do anything for it. You'll follow drugs to the end of the earth. You know, you'll give up anything when you're in that.
Wow.
There is a point when it does take control, right?
And you got to that point.
Oh yeah.
And at what age were you at that point? Like,
so truthfully, when I dropped out of college, that's where I was.
yeah.
That's where I was. So we'll backtrack a little bit.
Yep.
So it's faded a lot, but there's the scar on my neck from when I was 17. I might have been 16. I think I was 16. What had happened was I was in my drug addiction. Still living with my grandparents, but my biological mother overdosed on stuff and found herself homeless in Wichita. And my grandpa's like, Matt, I can't leave my daughter on the streets without a place to go. We have to give her a place to stay. So now, as if, you know, bitterness and resentment wasn't already, you know, taking its toll, she moves in. And of course,
So your biological mom moves in years later after being out of your life for a long time.
Yep.
With you.
At my grandparents.
And your grandparents.
Yep. And took my room, and I had to stay in the dining room. It was so bad. I was so mad. And but of course, we started doing drugs together. Of course, right? That was our bonding. And I got drunk one day, and I was working with my grandparents. I started working with them. They had a janitorial service.
Okay.
And I started working with them at a young age because I wanted things. And my grandpa's like, I'm not just going to buy you whatever you want.
Right.
If you want this, you can work for me and your grandmother to help us clean the buildings, and I'll pay you $5 an hour.
Yeah.
You buy it yourself. And really, I'm grateful for that because it instilled in me that you got to work for what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It's probably what kept me out of prison while a lot of my friends were stealing stuff for drugs because I would go to work and buy my drugs. But back to the situation with my mother, I got drunk one day, and I was supposed to go work with my grandparents. And and my grandpa could smell it on me, and I was denying it, of course, you know. And biological mother steps in, and you know, like, she's pretty much telling on me, you know, and we get into this dispute between the two of us, and she says, you know, I brought you in this world, I could take you out. And I had a brand new pocket knife. It was so sharp, and I opened it up and I gave it to her, and she gets this smirk on her face, and she folds it back up real slow and hands it back to me and says, do it yourself, tough guy. And I didn't even blink. I just opened it and went for it. And they took me.
Jiminy Christmas. You slit your own throat.
Yep. I went from here to here. And like the scar is probably faded. I mean, it's been
I can still see it from here pretty well. So
yeah. They said I was close. I was real close. And they put me in the crisis center there in Emporia, Kansas. And they, you know, watched me overnight just in case I had suicidal intent, you know. And when they evaluated me in the morning, they said, you know, do you want to kill yourself? Do you want to hurt yourself or anyone else? And I mean, I told them plain as day, and it was honesty, but I can't believe they took it as you're fine. I just told them, you know, like, no, I was drunk, and I just didn't care one way or the other. And they said, oh, that's perfectly normal.
So in that moment of you in front of your own biological mother, slitting your own throat, you literally didn't care if you had died at that moment.
I didn't. I didn't. It didn't even. There was no nervousness. There was nothing. It was.
Did your mom? I mean, did she panic? Did she care in that moment?
Her response actually still makes me laugh to this day. She actually started cussing me out. She says, that was real fucking stupid. And she, you know,
Yeah.
And so I've got blood running down my side and being cussed out. And I'm just, you know, it was.
Gosh, man, that is so toxic.
Yeah.
And just jacked up. Like, that's her son.
Yeah.
You know, her biological, man, I'm sorry, bro. That's awful.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm, and you've heard me say this before, like, God don't waste your past, right?
Yeah.
And so all these things, you know, all these experiences have contributed to, I mean, ultimately who God's making me to be, right? So, I wouldn't remove any of them, truthfully.
Yeah.
Because they all have had an impact on my heart, my personality, just the man I am.
Yeah.
Right. And not saying all those impacts are good.
Yeah.
But I got to leave that to God to decide. Right.
Yeah.
So.
So that's at that phase. So what happens for the next years, right?
Grandma and Grandpa come home because they had to go do that job by themselves because I was drunk. I'm sitting here on the couch, and by this time I'm starting to get a little lightheaded. I've lost a lot of blood.
Wow.
And so Mom wasn't going to call the ambulance. Like, they called them when they got home. And that's when my grandma finally said, you know what, we're not helping him at all. You know,
While you were bleeding out on the couch, they said that?
No, not like we're not going to help him now. Like,
Okay.
they called the ambulance. They called the ambulance.
Got you.
But what she meant was him being here, we're not helping him. By taking him in, we're not doing
We're enabling him.
Yeah. And so that's when I ended up being sent off to foster care, clear across the state again.
And that was what age?
16.
16.
Yep. And it was kind of crazy because I got put in like the nicest foster home a guy could ask for.
Really?
Like, they were just the sweetest people. They had their son and then 2 others plus me, right? Great family, great, you know, real controlling. But I came in and actually changed that a little bit because I sat down with Nick and Sherry was their names, and I was like, listen, I just come from like doing whatever I want. This is not going to work, and if I need to call my case manager and just be moved, we'll do that now.
Yeah.
And so they loosened up. I mean, pretty much just for me,
right?
To allow me to have some freedom.
And how long were you there?
Till I graduated. My grades started going down when I started smoking pot again, and my case manager, she came and she's like, listen, you might be getting ready to turn 18, but we can keep you. We don't have to let you go just because you're 18.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, my grades are going back up.
Right. Yeah.
So they went up to, you know, D's passing.
Yep.
You know, I got them up there, and then as soon as right after my graduation, I pretty much moved straight in with my new best friend there, who was a lot of, you know, he was the guy when I moved in town when I didn't know any drug dealers. He was the guy who closed that gap.
So you looked for a drug dealer, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right after, like, because I graduated in like in the custody of the state of Kansas, they see it as like you don't have parents to pay your way through college. So I had a free ride through the community college there.
Yeah.
I enrolled. I was going to go for drafting and architecture because I have an Uncle Tom who was an architect. But I made it to every class once, and I never went back.
Right.
Yeah.
So end up dropping out of that, and then so that's 18. So what happens from 18 to 32? Like, what do those years look like?
So I built, honestly, there in Arc City where I graduated high school, I actually got in debt with the guy I was getting drugs from. And so I ended up moving, kind of a weird circumstance. One of my friends wrecked his truck, got some money for the full coverage insurance. So we moved to Columbia, Missouri. And I ended up meeting a girl there. Of course, she worked at one of the clubs there. It was
a strip club?
A stripper. Yeah, she was a stripper. And I ended up moving in with her and getting a job pouring concrete. So I was making good money, had a hot girlfriend, you know, like life was better, right? But it didn't stay that way for long.
Just right back into the drug thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I found that right away when I found her, right?
So your whole life you were pursuing drugs. I mean, everywhere you went.
Everywhere.
Right.
Everywhere. It wasn't until I was 30 when I moved from Muscatine to Davenport that I actually wanted change. That was the first time that I realized that like my life wasn't going to get any better.
Yeah.
You know.
So talk about that. Let's talk about the whole like how you went from all of a sudden, right? I want change.
Yeah. So I lived in Muscatine for probably 7 or 8 years when I moved up here. And when I got there, I wanted my life to get better. I didn't want any change, you know, like I didn't want to change anything, right? So I created the same life all over again.
Gosh, that's such a pause you because that statement
yeah.
is so powerful for people that don't use drugs as well as we know in the work of being a pastor.
Yeah.
I want a better life, but I don't want change.
Yeah.
You know, that is, man, that could be a t-shirt.
For sure. For sure. It's so common in so many areas. You know, like you said, that statement isn't confined to guys or girls struggling with addiction. I mean, that can go to, you know, I want to be 50 pounds slimmer, but I don't want to make the change to get that, you know, and that's everywhere.
Yeah.
But back to
so that process of like actually getting to the place.
So it started in like 2014 at my adopted mom. We'll do that just for clarity between the two.
Yep.
My adopted mom, she would never commit me to rehab as long as I had a job. She wouldn't make me lose a job.
Yep.
But I lost my job because of a failed drug test. So her and my aunt got together and they committed me to Country Oaks. That was the first time I had been to rehab in Iowa. And I go to rehab. Country Oaks is co-ed. I meet a girl. We move her to Muscatine with me. When I get out, we actually got kicked out for having a relationship in rehab. That was that whole thing. Of course, that was a miserable fail. And then I ended up, we broke up. She moved somewhere else. I moved back in with Mom and my brother. I got away from the drugs, but couldn't get away from the alcohol. He drinks you know, like every day
Yep.
kind of thing. And then I won't go into too many details with that factor of it. But then I meet another girl, move in with her, and then it's the same spiral. I lived with mom long enough to get a job, you know, get healthy, you know, put the weight back on, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then I move out and do the same thing, back on meth, back on drugs, you know. And this time, when I lost that job, once again, failed drug test, I was, by this point, I had to finally admit that I had an alcohol problem. You know, I've had 4 public intoxes by this point.
Oh, wow.
You know, like,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't like, and see, when I went to rehab, all other times up until 2016, I went as a drug addict. I got a drug problem, and so I would get out and pretty much go to the liquor store.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And it always ended up back in the same place. Well, for the first time, I had to admit I had an alcohol problem. You know, I can't drink either, and this is the one charge on my record that's not a well, and it still kind of is a substance abuse thing, you know, but I went to the store down there and I stole a half gallon of vodka. And I think I was, honestly, I think in a way I wanted to be caught. To get caught? In a way, yeah, I really do, because, I mean, things were horrible at that point. But, of course, I go to jail for it, and then my mom and my aunt, again, they get a hold of the judge, commit me again. My mom's like, don't let him out. You won't find him if you let him out to take him. Just keep him there and take him to rehab. And that's what they did. But at that point, it started off in spite, right? Like, I was kind of spiteful that I was committed again, right? So I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll just move. You know, and you guys can't do this to me anymore, right?
Yeah.
But then I would say, maybe a week in, like, something changed. You know, I started, the drummer over at, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, come on. Edgewood Baptist Church over there.
Yeah.
He would come and pick me up for church while I was at Country Oaks.
Wow.
Yeah. And man, something started to change. You know, like there was some things changing, and I remember, I went up to the altar. I've always been huge at altar calls. It started as a young kid.
Yeah.
You notice sometimes still during prayer, I'll go up and I'll get down at the altar. There's just something about it. There's, you know, but I remember going forward, and at that point, I still craved drugs. You know, I did. And I remember saying kind of a reckless prayer, like, Lord, take this away from me. Like, I don't want to want them anymore, you know, but I do, you know. And so I got I got up from there, nothing, like, I wanted this instant, you know, abracadabra, it's all gone, but that's not how that played out.
Yeah.
Right. And so my counselor, I told her that I wanted to move to Davenport. They got me an application to the Unity House right over the road here. Moved in there. For about a year, I was a little under a year. I was clean, but I was miserable. Right. I went to all these NA, AA meetings. You know, I even started chairing a couple of them. You know, I tried diving in head first into just recovery. And at the end of the day, I was still empty. And so I ended up going back out, started using again. Because in my mind, man, it was like, at least the drugs made that feeling go away. Right? And so this time was different with the drug use because like the misery in it. Like there, by the end of that, I'll call it a run, right? Like by the end of that time of ripping and running the streets of Davenport, like it was all misery. Like there was nothing left in it to enjoy, right? And so when I started going to the casino too, that was a later addiction.
Yeah.
Right. So not only do I got the drugs absorbing my money, now I got the casino absorbing my money. So I'm not paying my rent there. And then everything just kind of ran its course. And I ended up going to, they had house meetings every Sunday there. And I told Eric, I announced it in front of everybody. I was like, look, I haven't been to any meetings this week. I should probably go to rehab.
Yeah.
And like you could have heard a pin drop in the room. His jaw was on the floor. Like he just couldn't believe it. But he came around to me as I was packing my things because I'm 3 months behind on rent. I'm not sober. You got to go.
Yep.
Right. But he did come around to me. He's like, you amaze me still. He's like, it just tells me that there's still hope for you. That glimpse of honesty in everything.
Yeah.
And by the end of that, like I've told this story, I was sitting behind an abandoned house over there. I went to jail, did 30 days. They told me court order to go to Country Oaks again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had, because I had a little stretch there where I wasn't working a good job, wasn't making enough for it to matter, so I got on food stamps. And so I got out of jail. I traded all my food stamps for drugs. I went and donated plasma, and I just got as much as I could possibly get before I went to Country Oaks. And the place where we were squatting had dust mites all in it, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're in there for a few days, and by the end of it, man, I'm sitting out behind this place, and I'm just itchy, and I got nowhere to shower, and it occurred to me for the first time in my life, I got nowhere to go. Like I've always had some place, that would take me in, some place that would, that kind of sheltered me from my own decisions kind of thing. And this time there wasn't. And there was this moment, and I remember looking up to the sky. It was probably like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm just like, Lord, what do I do? And I'm not going to say it was audible, right? I have a hard time telling people that I heard God audibly, right? But either way, it was the loudest thought I've ever heard in my life, and it was, Matt, you chose this, right? Because my whole life, he put things in place to pull me out of it, to protect me from my grandparents, even my uncle taking me and took me out of that drug scene. Yeah. And I pursued it constantly in my life. It's what I made up my mind I wanted to do. I actually threw away what I had left in my pocket, which was which is huge if you know a drug addict. They're not throwing away drugs. I threw away what I had left in my pocket, and I went to Country Oaks where I met Kirk, and he was going to 180, and he gave me the idea, and I filled out the application. They pretty much took me in right away. Wow. And I tell this side of it because I think it's very important. By time I got to the 180, I wasn't looking to get sober. Yeah. I was looking for God. Because I tried getting sober, and it didn't work. Yeah. Right. And so by the time I got to the 180, and it was like, I've always known, like it was instilled in me from my grandparents that, Jesus Christ he's real, he's your Savior, like call on him, and I needed that incubator.
Yeah.
That's what 180 served as. It was an incubator. It got all the other things, all the other distractions, all the other influences. It put them on the outside where they couldn't affect me.
Mm.
And I got to spend 14 months
Wow.
pursuing God.
Yeah.
Right. And that changed everything. It really did.
Yeah.
So,
And you always say, I mean, you have an unusual story. Like you, at that point, didn't really crave it anymore.
it went away. It was taken away. And which reminds me, I prayed that prayer. God, take this from me.
Mm.
He didn't do it immediately. But over the course of that next 3 years, it was kind of like what he did with Israel, right?
Yeah.
You want idols? Here, have idols. Have all the idols you want.
Yeah.
Send them to Babylon, right? You want drugs? Here, have all the drugs you can handle.
Yeah.
And it ran its course. And by the end of that, there was nothing appealing about it. There was nothing left to attract me or draw me back to it.
Yeah.
Like he answered that prayer.
Right.
Yeah.
Praise God. And then during that, was it during 180 that you started coming to the Rock too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And how'd you end up there?
So the story with the Rock is actually kind of funny too, because there was a guy at the Unity House, Joe Schaefer. He came to the Rock. He used to come with Larry. I don't know his last name.
Yeah. Fennelly, I think.
Yeah. Yep. He used to come with him. Excellent dude, man. But he didn't have a license. I did, and so I would take him up to the gym and drop him off. Right. I would never go in.
The church was at the gym at the time.
Yeah, I was still at the gym.
Yeah.
And I would like never go in. I just drop him off.
Right.
Sometimes come get him.
Yeah.
But there was a point when I decided, you know what, I'm going to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember your dad was preaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I remember what grabbed me, besides the fact it was in a weightlifting gym. I'm like, how self-righteous can they be? We're in a gym. And so that was kind of comforting factor. Everybody was very welcoming. But I remember your dad was, he emphasized forgiveness. Mm. And he's like, God's seen you flip that guy the bird on your way in here this morning, but he forgives you. It was something along those lines.
One of Dad's cheesy jokes. But
it hit, because that bit of, just that little bit of reality to it, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not foreign to the fact that, people flip people off in traffic. We're not going to sugarcoat that here. There was realness. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't this superficial, holier than thou. There was none of that.
Yeah.
And so it left a lasting impression on me. And I don't think I ever came back until 2020. I was going to Calvary.
Okay.
And they shut down for COVID.
Oh, I didn't know this part.
Yes,
okay.
They shut down for COVID, and I'm sitting in the Stability House over there with my roommate, John Beasley, and I'm like, dude, I need people. Mm-hmm. Like this, dude, I just need people. And I'm like, and then The Rock came to my mind. I was like, you want to go to this church? And I've been to once, but, it was kind of laid it out for him. And we went, and Josh Arguello, I didn't have a license at that point, but he used to come down and pick me up every day, every Sunday for church.
Really? Yeah. I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So Josh was bringing you every week.
Yep. He started coming, picking me up every Sunday, and I look back at it, and it had to be such a pain because he was already there doing sound.
Yeah.
And then he would leave, come all the way back down the hill, practically drive past his house.
Right.
Pick me up and take me to church and then drop me off.
Right.
And he was faithful, man.
So then you ended up staying at the Rock.
Yeah.
Obviously. That's the story.
Yeah. And a big factor in that was Josh would pick me up on Tuesday mornings, go to that Men of Valor, that morning
Bible study.
That morning Bible study.
That was down at Co-work, right? Downtown Denver?
It ended up being at the Cedar Street Church.
Okay. Yeah.
We were doing it down there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. And like right away, I just, there was something different. You know, like I don't think, and maybe they do, but I think there's probably a large portion of our congregation that doesn't really grasp how unique Rock Church is. You know, like I've tried going to other churches, you know, like I would have a breakup or something, and you know, like I would try to turn to God but couldn't stay there, you know, because everything, but I would try different. I've been to multiple churches, but nothing like Rock Church, man. Like there's the community, the openness, the welcomeness, the transparency that makes a huge difference, right? I can tell you when Rock Church really won my heart as far as wanting to just go all in was this is funny. It was your story from the pulpit. You told your story about your golf trip. You threw your club, had your anxiety attack, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, that was so embarrassing. Like, I would not have told that story. I'm just being honest, you know, like I would not have, but it said something to me. It spoke so loud because I'm like, man, he's leading in a way that says, look, I'm not above you. I'm not better than you, right? I'm broken too.
Yeah.
And when you lay that out for the congregation like you've done, it's like it creates a comfort and an openness where we don't feel like we have to show up with our Sunday best, right? We don't have to put on that superficial face, you know, because it's understood.
Yeah.
You know, we're broken. We all have struggles, and that's what the body's here for. Not to present yourself as perfect, but to let those struggles be known, and we will help each other. We lean on each other, you know, and it's an amazing thing here.
That's
really
awesome.
is.
Well, and now, I mean, fast forward, now you're helping lead the thing, which has been, I mean, I guess I'll speak to that because I guess I had a part to play in that. What I saw was that I would say the mantra of my ministry when I started coming on staff at church was I grew up in church and I had played the church game and I had seen that. I had seen pastors get up there and you know what I mean? I can't share any vulnerabilities or be authentic because the congregation will judge me, will look down on me. And I came in, which I think was really healthy, basically being funded from the outside business world, but this was a passion. Right. So I'm like, I don't have anything to lose. I'm going to get up here and tell everybody the honest truth that I'm walking this gospel life out with you. So many areas I still need transformation. And I'm like, what does a church look like when people can be really honest about where they're sinful?
Yeah.
I feel like that creates a community and a love that most people don't experience in the world.
Very much.
Right. Because how many people have friendships where like you're telling the deepest, darkest secrets? It's and it creates such a real intimacy that people don't experience today. And it's still, as you know, the message that drives our church.
Oh, yeah.
Because grace is just talk if there's no grace to be poured out on something, right?
Right.
When you really open someone up and they're like, hey, I'm addicted to pornography. And it's mortifying for that man to say that. But then they're met with love and grace. That empowers people to transform.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
And oddly enough, it's still the thing that's fought the hardest about our church, though, as well. And you've witnessed this, you know, and it's something that I just will probably go to my deathbed preaching. And I saw that in you, though. What I was getting at is in that You know, you see a guy who had been at bottom, who grasped this message of the gospel. And it's funny, man, because you look at the guys that are all well-dressed that come into the church that are well-to-do, oh, that guy has leadership potential. What I'm looking for are people that grasp the gospel.
Yeah.
You know, the people that get that, because when you have experienced that grace yourself, you pour that grace out on other people. Yeah. That's what transforms communities. Yeah. And now we fast forward, right? I come to you a couple of years ago, and I'm like, hey, man, I think you need to get an elder track. You know, so you jump in elder track, and now I think you guys are close to done, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah, you guys are about done. In the midst of all that, I'm like, hey, I have two guys with you and Josh that have both come from addiction. My entrepreneurial self, I'm like, we're doing something with this. God has put this in our lap. Yeah. Two guys that have been transformed by the gospel. Mm-hmm. Right? What do we do? So I start going out, and I find this program, and I'm like, we're starting this. Yeah. And boom, here we are. About to be 3 houses and
a year and a month.
A year and a month old. So yeah, for those that don't know, we have 2 houses that are fully functioning and full. Yep. And then we just bought our 3rd house, which we close on in March, which will put us, I mean, when the house is full, I mean, we'll be over 20 guys at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's once the upstairs opens, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is looking like we're going to get access to that right away as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, talk about what that's been like. So, I mean, saved, and now you're like giving back to what you came from. Yeah. Process that a little bit.
Man. Well, once again, you know, God won't waste your past.
Yeah.
Right? And so you know, my time in Davenport it started in community living.
Yeah.
Went back to community living with 180, and now doing this, right?
Yeah.
So I see it as God kind of trained me for 6-7 years there, you know, like, because I mean, it was 3 years there, 3.5 years over there, you know, living in this sort of, you know, what the Covenant House is. So I've got plenty of insight on what this is, what it looks like, the stunts, You've
seen all the tricks.
Yeah, some stuff that would blow your mind, and we're not going to go into. But it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah,
it really is. You know, we kind of talked the other day about, you know, like my vision for what I want for all of these guys. You know, and I don't want to get them sober, you know. I mean, yeah, I want that for them, but it's so much more than that, you know. Like, you know, I want to see them free from their addiction. I want to see them walking in that freedom, living lives that glorify God, you know. And like, because in my experience, getting sober isn't enough. It won't last. Right? There's a fulfillment, a God-sized hole that only He can fill. And man, when you're delivered from something as dark as addiction, like, dude, the gratitude, you know, there is, I guess, a sense of a debt to your Savior. Like, man, you know, like, I could never repay you.
Those who are forgiven much love much.
Yeah.
That one has to hit home.
It does.
Yeah.
It does a lot.
Which is why you've been so perfect, I mean, boots on the ground with this, because your ability to give out grace, forgiveness, see the patterns, know what the guys are dealing with. But also, we are not just an addiction program.
Right.
And it's something that we're always saying. Like, hey, I don't just want you clean, I want you, which is why we called our houses Covenant House.
I love it.
Right, because our goal is to get them in the new covenant of Christ. I mean, in a relationship with Him that transforms their lives inside out completely.
Yes.
And that's always been the goal. Yeah.
So much. And, you know, I'm going to kind of hint on the transparency thing, because I just cycled through and did one-on-ones with all the guys this last. And it's like, I get done with one guy, and I'm like, I'm reading what I come out with, and I'm like, dude, this was fruitful, right?
Yeah.
And you get the next guy come in, right? And you're like, blah, you know? And you're like
superficial.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah, pretty much. But, like, even that one was super fruitful on our end, because I'm like, okay, this guy is not being open at all, right? And so now you know that, right? You know, to be poking and prodding and like, you know, like, hey man, this is where transformation happens. You've got to bring it to the light.
Which is a parallel to what we deal with, because you also deal with people that aren't in addiction, and it's it's the same.
Yep.
We get them in Kingdom communities, or we counsel someone, and it's, how are things going? Good, man. Things are great. And I'm like, no, I'm going to ask that one more time. How are things going? And it's funny that people aren't. I don't know if they haven't tasted it, if they haven't died to themselves completely and just said, you know what? Like, I'm here to serve an audience of one. I'm willing to lay it all out there. I know that confession brings healing, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something, it's just, there's a parallel. It's really the ministry of our whole church.
Yeah.
And it just poured out into addiction and into the Covenant House. It's amazing watching God do what he's done. Man. You know, just with the church in general, where he placed us, the whole picture.
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of ironic to me that we ended up here, because like this was kind of my stomping grounds when I fell off over here. You know, I ran up and down Kirkwood and up and down 15th over here.
Really?
Yeah.
You never told me that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, never come up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it was very ironic. When I first moved into the house, I was kind of like, man, I hope I don't see somebody, you know. Now I'm like, you know, if I do, I'm giving an application.
Yeah. Has that been weird? I mean, now that you're like helping people, does that ever happen? Do you ever run into people from the past or anything like that?
I have had a couple conversations with people from the past. Now there's some that I'll avoid.
Yep.
And normally women. If I'm honest. I'm honest, normally women. It's always kind of been a weakness.
Yeah.
You know, but I have had a couple conversations, and normally when I tell them what I'm doing, they kind of shrink back, and you know, which is kind of disappointing, because you know, kind of be nice to share that story once, and for them to ask questions and be like, come on to church, right?
Yeah.
But it never goes that way.
Right.
It never goes that way so far. So
I'm sure it will. But yeah, for those that don't know, Matt now, I mean, the 13-year-old preacher boy now preaches. I mean, he's a super gifted preacher. I'm preaching more and more all the time, which has been incredible, and leading Covenant House and a thriving ministry that's growing faster than
we planned for.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been an awesome testimony, man, and I'm just pumped about what God's doing in your life and going to continue to do.
For sure.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say?
I just want to thank Rock Church for being what you are. You know, the community here. You guys make it. You know, and I thank you. I thank our leadership. You know, for seeing something in me, for giving me a chance. You know, like it's made a world of a difference.
Amen. All right. Well, love you, Rock Church. See you guys soon.